Potawatomi,
arts,
culture,
and entertainment.
This is a Pace production.
Please put your hands together for our graphic novelist, Weston Thompson.
Thank you, Adam. I also want to say thank you to Pace for having me here. They've been wonderful hosts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the graphic novel that I just published. My name is Weston Thompson. I never really thought I'd be making a graphic novel. It kind of took me by surprise, but once I started working on it, it's something that I kind of became obsessed with and just had to finish. And I'm sure some of your artists in here maybe have had a similar experience. I'm going to take off my mask if that's okay with everybody. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to jump right in. So thank you for coming here. I really appreciate you coming out to support and learn about this project. So a little bit more about me. I'm an artist. I studied art. I got a BFA degree in college. I started drawing when I was 3. I loved it. Couldn't put down a pencil and paper. As I grew older, I started to get into painting and sculpture. This painting is actually right over here on the wall. But I really just dabbled in lots of different stuff. Sculpture, painting, ceramics, music, lots of different creative outlets. I found that as an artist, it didn't really matter what medium it was the act of creating something and the act of trying to express yourself that really drew me. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to check? Okay. And you can go to my website, westonthompson.com. I have a lot of work on there, and also information about the graphic novel. So, like I said earlier, I never planned on being a graphic novelist. I didn't even really write that much or do any sequential art. But one night, I remember specifically, I was kind of having a stressful month, a couple of weeks, kind of some anxiety, and I started to think about what I call a visual mantra. Okay, so a mantra is something you can tell yourself. The classic one is calm, cool, and collected. But the visual mantra is something you imagine that is like a loop that helps you maybe get through a situation or deal with stress or just relax. So my visual mantra, I don't know where it came from, I don't know how it happened, but I would imagine this really bright light that was just traveling in the middle of the universe somewhere I didn't know, and it was super powerful, really powerful light. And I would just see it out there, and I would imagine it just like this. And I would place any kind of a negative thought in front of this light, in front of this like beam. And this light was so powerful that it would break through and smash apart and kind of destroy any of these negative, anxious thoughts I had. And I would just cycle this through. I'd stick a negative thought in front of it, and it would break through. I'd stick a negative thought in front of it, it would break through. It would help me kind of deal with just the stress of everyday life. One night I was doing this. I was relaxing. I was doing this. And I was like, what is this? What is this thing? What is this super powerful thing that I have that's just breaking through everything and helping me relax? So I zoomed in on it in my mind. I imagined what this light was flying out in the middle of the universe. I zoomed in on it, and I saw a figure in my imagination. This was the start of the story. I did not know I was going to make a graphic novel. I did not know this would lead to a story. But this started my story. This created a character for me. And I do watch a lot of superhero movies. I read a lot of comic books and graphic novels, but I never really found myself attached to a specific character. So I zoomed in, I saw this person, I was like, who is this person? And this person ended up being my main character of my first book, which is called System, and this is Eileen. And Eileen is this healer. She's a healer. In my mind, she was helping me kind of deal with my own stress, so she became a healer in my mind. And I guess the point of this beginning of how I started is just to say that just one character themselves can inspire your whole story, right? You don't necessarily need to back up and imagine a whole story arc in the beginning. Sometimes you can just think of one character, and that character will then lead you down this path of story making. Also, kind of like, has anyone ever people watched before? You kind of sitting there, you see someone, and you kind of maybe imagine, how their day's been going, what's going on. It's kind of the same thing. Our minds naturally do this. So I was really excited about figuring out who this person was and developing this character, but I had serious doubts about my ability to create a story. But as I started to think more and more about this person, think more and more about Eileen, I realized that we create stories all the time. And I was afraid to just kind of accept what I naturally do. This is how we think about our experience whenever we're thinking about our lives, thinking about our friends. It's how we piece together our experience of our lives. So if you're worried about storytelling, you're fooling yourself, because this is something we do. We tell ourselves stories, we tell other people stories, we create stories. Some of them we like, some of them we don't like. We select certain stories as memories. That's just how we get through our life. So this is something just really easy. We all do this, and it's something that's really accessible. So how do you begin your story? I asked again, how many people are thinking about writing a graphic novel or a full comic or have done it? Okay, yeah, awesome, okay. So a good number of you. So I think beginning is maybe hard for some people, it's easy for others. Sometimes the middle part is the hardest, but beginning, just ask questions, okay? So in my circumstance, when I was imagining this character, I just started asking myself questions about them. And that's how all this started. Why is Eileen in space? These are very simple questions. It's the simpler the better. Why is she alone? Why is she flying? How does she fly? Where is she going? All these questions, I was like, I got to figure out who this person was. This is something I've been using in my mind, the visual mantra to help me get through things. And these questions started to lead me down to a narrative that I felt like I was discovering as I answered these questions. And the one question would lead to another, that question would lead to another, and before I knew it, I had built a small story around this person. Once you start thinking about these narratives, you just gotta go as far as you can with them. Some of them will be dead ends. Other ones will keep opening up new stories and new things. And this is kind of the part, this is Albert Einstein's desk right after he died. So this is his kind of how it was at the end of his life. When you're chasing these stories and asking questions, this is kind of like you're, just make a mess, take notes, write things down, free writing everything that you think about, let it happen. And don't worry about keeping it all clean, because you're just gonna have to get stuff out. This is kind of like the wall of crazy that you see in detective movies, when they're like, okay, so Eileen came here, her family built this thing, and then they built it because of this, but then, it just keeps connecting. And this is what's happening in your brain, at least it was happening in my brain. And I had to keep writing things down and chasing things down and trying to figure out how everything was connected. And your brain does a really good job of connecting things. So yeah, this is kind of what happens. You have a wall of crazy in your mind. Some people get it out on an actual wall, that's fine too. And you can write it out. And it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to make a kind of a vision board too as you go through, if you're not comfortable with drawing yet. So these are just some of my initial sketches. And these are very simple compared to the final product while I was making it, but just trying to understand if Eileen was alone in who she was, if she had kind of a group of other people that she hung out with. I was really interested in music at the time, so I wanted to incorporate some sound, but just kind of random notes, get it out, get it scribbled. Even just doing stick figures was a good way to start. And the cool thing about this is once you have one character identified and you start asking questions about that character, other characters will just show up. You'll just start to see other characters. So I started with Eileen, and eventually Eileen led me to her mentor Vega, and a scrapper named Q, Otto, all these other characters started to kind of come up and evolve. And each of these characters has their own story too, and their own background. So before you know it, you have your hands full with lots of these potential characters, stories that can get crossed, histories and futures that you can play with. So a big part of my graphic novel system was research, because I was, Eileen was flying around in the universe, so I had to figure out what's going on there. How does she fly? I was interested in science fiction, so this kind of was something that I enjoy thinking about. But just remember that research is really important. It can introduce some restraints also to some of your ideas, which can stimulate some creativity. So basically, think of it as a research opportunity, and it should also be internal and external. And what I mean by that is that you're telling the story, and a lot of the story is actually coming from your own experience and who you are. So you have to also investigate that, as well as investigate the context and the imagery and all the information around your story as well that's external. So research. I will suggest, if you're interested in graphic novels, your public library is a wonderful place to start. They have a huge selection of graphic novels. And reading them and seeing how they work, if you're interested in that kind of medium, is one of the best ways to study. Because your mind, when you're imagining your story, if you're thinking about writing a comic or a graphic novel, you need to start imagining it in that format. So reading more graphic novels will help you with that. Local library is a great place to start. I also want to recommend this kind of graphic novel toolkit by Blambot, if you haven't seen this before. A whole bunch of rules that you can that apply to comic books and graphic novels, lettering, thought bubbles, all that stuff. Great rules here to follow and learn from the industry, and I recommend this highly. So drawing should also be part of your research. Now, like I said before, I wanted to have a style of drawing where I could just get ideas out, so I wasn't spending a long time on one image, right? So I wasn't just saying, here's a picture of island or a space scene. I didn't spend like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on that one image. I wanted to kind of draw quickly. So this style for me is more like a stick figure that you build up and then form and then cut into and erase and take away from. And this helped me in kind of envision how people moved, their physical features, and it led to the fin on top of the head as well. Now, before I finally figured out what my main style was going to be for the graphic novel, I experimented a lot. So this was one of my early drawings they're called tuners, the main characters of my story. One of my early drawings of them, and then another drawing I did over here when I was trying to develop. I was thinking, well, I could make this whole graphic novel in color, I could render everything. I was trying to play around with some different variations. I also did some paintings. So these are some paintings of some concept art for the story. This is a island up here on an asteroid, and then kind of a zoomed out scene over here as well. I was trying to discover who she was, and sometimes you need to draw somebody and develop a character that way, because you can't always figure out who they are in your mind or just with writing. So drawing them will give you some more information about who they are, what they look like, all that kind of stuff. I know it sounds obvious, but it was a good exercise to do it. So make multiple variations of your characters early on. And then some of your stories may have pivotal moments in them that you're developing. Try to render one of those pivotal moments, right? Try to render one of those parts of your story that has high contrast, a lot going on. And so here, this is another painting, and then this was some early concept art on your right-hand side over here. I'm just trying to figure out who my characters were, where they came from. And some of the drawings, I would get inventive in the drawings because the characters or the drawing itself would lead me somewhere, and then that would help me develop my story more as well. So, strengthening your story. So at this point, this had been about probably about 7 or 8 months in. Okay, so I had a job, I have a family. I was doing this graphic novel in my spare time. I was taking notes on my phone. I was waking up in the middle of the night, writing stuff down, doing sketches when I could in between classes. So I had a rough outline of the graphic novel at this point. And what I needed to do now was figure out what are the key kind of elements of storytelling to help really make this the story more robust and make it compelling for other people. Because other people would not share my same experience of creating the story, which is very rewarding for me as an artist. So I wanted to make sure that the story was valuable for them and I could make it compelling enough for them to be engaged into it. So one of the things that I realized is that you can have thematic stories, and these themes can be literal or figurative. And a theme can be something that you value or you're interested in. And you can have this in your story. It can be underlying, it can be subtle, or it can be very literal. For me, these are the things that I was really interested in covering in system. So entropy was kind of a fun idea that I was playing with, and it was the idea that you have something that has a natural order, and you have something else that has multiple variations of that order. And that was something that entropy was a really interesting concept for me to develop in this story. Isolation. Why was Island alone? I figured that isolation was something I wanted to deal with as well, and it's also kind of a social issue that a lot of people face, especially today. Healing was something I wanted to talk about because Island was, in my imagination, a healing force. Mental health was also something I thought was really important. Perfectionism, systems theory, and tuning. So these are some underlying themes in the book. And not all of them come to the surface very obviously, but they're in there, and I was thinking about them while I was writing. So elements of a story. Many of you might already know these. That's a nice slow fade. So, plot, setting, characters, conflict, complication, resolution, and sometimes a moral. Okay, so when I was strengthening my story, I had to learn about this stuff because I wanted to make sure that I was paying attention and not missing something crucial to the story that readers who are familiar with graphic novels and literature were expecting. So you are making a book at the end of this, and you're making a story, and these are what people expect that you've developed. So a lot of things in here, if you haven't understood these or where they come from, just take a mental shot of these. Very helpful. We talked a lot about characters so far and setting. So you don't always have to have a moral, but this is maybe something that will arise naturally if you want to tackle it for your audience. And then this is the hero's journey. Anybody who's seen a Marvel movie or pretty much read any comic book or origin story might know about this. And this is called a monomyth. It's something that is repeated throughout our history about somebody who is considered a hero. And it really has to do with somebody who goes into the unknown, goes through some transformations, gets help along the way, and comes out a new person. This is something a lot of us can relate to. It's something that a lot of us know just from reading stories in our lives. And this was really important for me when I was developing Island, because I knew who Island was at the time I imagined her, but I didn't know where she was going, what was happening to her, how she became who she was. So as a character, I plugged Island into this, and I said, you know what? This is really helpful for me, because I knew that she was going to tackle some big conflicts. I knew that she was going to develop kind of come into her own power. And then, maybe save the day, possibly. And then, this is a process that we're all used to and something that we are interested in when we're reading stories. I was also really drawn to the mentor aspect of this. In my past life, I did a whole bunch of mentoring for young kids, and it's something that I wanted to incorporate in my story, and I thought it was a really great part of what this hero's journey is about, because a lot of people who we acknowledge and think of as heroes, we don't always realize all the help that they got to get there. And so mentoring is a really big part of that in everyone's life, probably. So I really wanted to kind of play into that as well. You guys okay out there? Yeah? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Just check it. I've been talking a lot. Okay. Another thing that you might want to consider is that creativity sometimes needs some conditions, some variables that restrict it, okay? When you have too much freedom, it's not always easy to make decisions. If you say to yourself in your story that you want to have some limitations, that will cause your imagination to run wild. It really does. So for me, because I was interested in escapism, I wanted people to read this graphic novel, and I wanted them to feel like they could escape whatever they were in their reality and go into a new world and really into a safe narrative space. So I had some things that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't gonna do. I didn't want to use guns. That's something that guns have been traumatic for lots of people. I don't want them to be thinking about that when they're reading my story. People are self-propelled. I was interested in this because in a lot of space science fiction, everyone's got a starship or a spaceship and they fly around. I really like the idea of people like backpacking when you're kind of just, you have yourself in your backpack and you're hiking out through the unknown into the woods. I wanted that same kind of feeling to happen in my book. So I wanted people to be self-propelled. I wanted them to get where they needed to go on their own. I wanted to incorporate sound, because I'm really interested in making music. It's another hobby of mine. I wanted there to be multiple dimensions because that's just super cool. There's so much you can play with that, and I do feel like it's something people can relate to a little bit when they're feeling that there's other things going on that they can't see. I wanted to incorporate mentoring, as I said before, and I wanted to incorporate mythology. All things that I wanted to make sure that my story touched on and that I used when I was developing the story. So you might have your own conditions, you might have no conditions, but I recommend placing some limitations on you so that your imagination and creativity can really try to work with that and make something amazing happen. So this is just an example here of incorporating sound. So one of the elements that I was, one of the elements that I was trying to use was incorporating sound. And back in the day when I was doing sound art, this was actually a TV that I circuit bent, and I was able to run sound into it from my keyboard, and I was able to create these Lissajou patterns. And these are basically what happens if you have two different notes of sound that are being played at once, like a chord or a dyad, and they make different types of patterns. I was really interested in this because when I imagined Island, she had this kind of almost like atomic field around her, these kind of swirling things. And I remembered this from my past, and I was like, you know what? If I can use these, then I can incorporate sound, and this is a very visual way to incorporate sound in a graphic novel. So I took frames of what I created on the TV, and you can see here at the bottom when Eileen is learning how to use these oscillators that she has, these phosphorus oscillators in her hands. Each one of these oscillators in her hands can generate a frequency. And so this is her learning how to generate those frequencies. And this was actually one of the ones that I had created on my TV that I used in the book. And here's just a quick little image of people are self-propelled, one of my other conditions. There's a scene where two of the characters need to go down to Earth, and they're trying to look for life to rescue from Earth to bring back to outer space. But I couldn't have them like fly like a carrier there because they had to be self-propelled. So that led me to this design where you had this carrier here that was actually strapped on to, tethered to two people, and they flew it around. So again, I didn't imagine this in the beginning, but it was a condition that I wanted in my graphic novel, and that led me to be inventive when I had a part of my story that I could have just said, let's just fly this ship down and land, but with that condition I had to be creative and think of a visual, interesting way to make that happen. So, let's say you've gotten this far, you have your story, you have your characters, you've drawn out some frames, you have an idea of what you want to do. The end game here is to design a book, and you can't forget that you're actually designing a physical book. The physical book is different than just your sketches on paper. One of the things I wish I would have known early on was I wish I would have chosen a book size earlier. I did choose it in time before I made all my pages, but knowing what size of book you want to publish and then using those sizes when you're doing all your storyboards and everything else will really help. If you don't do this ahead of time, you'll be going back and trying to reformat all your drawings and fix things and make them all fit into the right size book. So this is just a quick shot of some just basic book sizes. And I went with a 6x9, which is a larger version of a typical trade paperback. And you can see here that when you're getting your books made, this is the page count that you can do with that size and the different page counts for the color or black and white. So identify your book size early on. If you have graphic novels at home, take a look at them, see what sizes they are, see how the artist fills in the page, how many frames are in there, and it'll really help you out. Storyboarding. So there are books about storyboarding, and there are rules about it that you can look at, probably from Disney and Pixar and all those other companies. But for me, this is an example of one of my storyboard pages. I recommend keeping it simple. Just draft it out quickly. kind of gesturally, be free with your lines, consider the pacing and consider page count. So I would go through a couple pages just like this, and I look back and go, I just drew 15 pages for like a 2-minute scene in my story. So you have to know, well, I could probably shorten it down, make it maybe 3 pages long, incorporate more. But this is how you work that stuff out. You work it out in the storyboard, and you figure out kind of where your blind spots are as a storyboard artist and as a graphic novelist. You want to make sure you're using your pages wisely, and you're not, your pacing is not too quick or too slow. Pacing is basically how long it takes something to happen in your graphic novel. So if someone's going to jump off a building, do a little roll, stand up and run, you can show that really like clip by clip by clip, every single frame. You can show it in 2 frames. You can show it in 5 frames. That's the pacing. And you want to kind of make some decisions about pacing as you're doing your graphic novel, as your storyboard, so that it's consistent. So I did the whole graphic novel on an iPad Pro using Procreate and the Apple Pencil here. And I started it in Photoshop with a Wacom tablet. And then I got this early on, and this changed the game for me. I'd never used a Cintiq, but drawing directly onto the tablet and the speed with which I could generate imagery in Procreate was huge. So if you haven't messed with an Apple Pencil or Procreate as a software, which is free, Procreate's free, you can get it for your iPad, I recommend it. It changed it for me. Without this, it probably would have taken me an extra year or 2 to get this thing done. So highly recommend this for digital artwork and sequential art. These are some time lapses. I usually start out my drawings in like a light blue or purple. Kind of gives me the sketchy feel. I get main things laid out, and I'm probably working from an idea I had on a storyboard concept. And I do change things around every once in a while, and you want to be able to do that. And then Procreate makes it really easy as long as you're using layers to switch things around. So I decided to go black and white for a couple reasons. The cost of production was a lot cheaper than color. I thought it was unique to do a black and white, heavy contrast story. I was interested in a sci-fi noir as well, so kind of like almost the darkness you'd see in a detective story. And then that led me to start using halftone patterns, which is the black dots you have in the background. And you can set up a brush and Procreate to do those black dots and generate different values, or the illusion of different values in the software. So really, I start off kind of with stick figures and big shapes. Start off with black, and then I cut in with white and an eraser over the top of that, and kind of build my images that way. And these are playing really fast, but it takes hours. It does take hours to draw these out. And you get better at it as you go through, and as you learn about the characters and how they look, everything kind of comes together as you move forward. And then, scenes like this, I had a djembe drum in my drawing room, and I was trying to figure out this machine that they would jump through that would beam them down to a certain spot, and that just kind of inspired that shape, and I went with that. Here's another shot. One of the landscapes I was inspired by, there's a large rock called Ship Rock in the southwest, and I thought it was a really interesting natural land formation, natural rock formation. So I used that as inspiration for this scene right here, and this is where they came down and landed and started looking for life on the planet. Sorry, I get super nerdy about this stuff. I could kind of talk about that, but that's kind of how it is. When you write your story, you're just out there. People are like, yeah, they fly in space and have sounds in their hands. Yeah, like, cool. Yeah, but I'm so excited about it. I love it. And it's just, it led to kind of all this. And everyone's got that seed that if they plant it, it will produce something that you just want to spend lots of time creating. I did struggle a bit with the space station concept. I'd never really drawn too many of those before, so I just kind of winged it, and it actually turned out all right, I feel, and eventually I kind of got the hang of it. This is a Brule station, And if anyone's ever driven from here to Colorado, there's a small city called Brule. I just added an extra U, but I thought it was a cool name. So always, like, when you're thinking about your story, everything that you see, you're like, oh my gosh, like, I can use that, or I can use that, or that's a cool name, that could fit here. It just kind of starts to become your reality. Sorry, my wife is here. She's heard more than enough about all this. This is another frame I was pretty happy with. And I will say that there are some pages that you just will not be able to draw right away, and they will just take you a long time to do. Other pages will just happen. This is one of those pages that just kind of happened. I started drawing it, everything worked, everything started filling in, it just went. Other pages I struggled with to get to happen, but this one was a success for me, at least. And there are some things about characters that I didn't fully develop until I was nearly done, and I had to go back through every page that they were in and add those little details that I added later. So it's hard to account for everything when you start. As you're making the story, things will pop up and you'll have to change some of your previous pages. So starting with almost just a silhouette, and then free sketching around this. This is one of my characters doing a transformation for Island. But it shows that there's kind of a lot of development just in this one frame. In the book I've created, so there's 149 pages, there's about 500 frames of drawings in there. So when they say that graphic novel will take anywhere from 3 to 5 years, they mean it, because you're doing upwards of 500 illustrations that are all separate, that all have to be connected. Here's kind of another, and this is all drawn from my mind for the most part. I did have used a couple references here and there, but I really relied on my imagination. I wanted this project to really be a challenge for my imagination, and I wanted to really work at it. So, but a lot of artists use references and cityscapes and other things to help themselves draw. This is the last one here. I just wanted to show these to take a little bit of that mystery out of how the pages actually get created, to give you guys an idea of how I start and how I work on them and how they become an actual finished page. So I'm working entirely in black and white, and then I add the grayscale later. And I created a star brush so I can do multiple dots at once. That helped a lot. Okay, so now you've gotten your idea, you've developed your story, you've strengthened your story, you've done all the artwork, and now you're worried about publishing. How do I publish? Like, who do I go to? Do I try to find a publisher? Do I write letters to agents? Do I try to send my idea to a Marvel or Image Comics or Dark Horse? How do I do this? I didn't know any of this stuff. So what I ended up doing was going with print on demand. But before you even start thinking about doing all that, I want you to think about these things. Number one, peer review. You're making a book for an audience, okay? If you do not talk to that audience about your story, they won't be able to connect with it necessarily. So getting feedback from them, what you're saying in your story will not always communicate to somebody, so you need to make sure that it's actually getting across. So plan to do multiple revisions. I had I think a system version like 13. I was just going through, you're gonna make lots of revisions. Lots and lots of revisions. Some people might say, I don't understand this character at all. Then you have to go back and try to figure out where you failed in terms of character development. And it just takes time. So I would say publishing, the process of peer review to publishing was a year. So after I had my comic, what I thought, done. Reach out to local writers and artists. They're around, they're hiding. They don't always talk about that they're making a comic. I didn't really talk about it that much. But I reached out to local artists who had done comic work before, done graphic novels, published, and they were a big help. Reach out to local nonprofits and literary festivals. There's a lot of resources for writing and design. How are we doing on time, by the way? Are we okay?
You're doing great.
Okay. I'm kind of a fast talker, so. Local nonprofits have a lot of resources. Many of them focus on traditional literature, but they do have helpful advice for someone who's doing a graphic novel as well. Join writing and self-publishing groups on social media. There's some Facebook groups you can join there with lots of people talking about the pains of producing their own works. And then before you say, this is available for everybody, order proof copies. And I think every single print-on-demand company will allow you to order a proof first. And even like local companies who you want to get your book printed, they'll give you a copy first. But always do that, check it. There's always things that you miss every time. I probably had 13 proof copies. 15? Yeah, my wife says more. Yeah, so 15, and that was, maybe something that I didn't consider on the inside of the book. Something was misaligned, or the cover was off a little bit. So yeah, and it just takes a little bit of time to get that the way you want it, at least for me. So here's a couple examples. The top one is a hard copy. Then I have a couple paperbacks here. When you order from KDP, which I'll talk about more, which is an Amazon print-on-demand company, your proof copies will have this not for resale bar on it. And then I think this middle one is from a company called Lulu. And then this one on the end is from Blurb or Ingram. But I got different copies. I wanted to see what it was like to actually read the book with different ways. Your book might be great in paperback, it might not be good in hard copy, or vice versa, you don't really know. But once you get that copy and you're able to flip through it and read it in an analog way, at least for me, since I was working in digital, it was a huge moment for me. I was really happy. I might have even cried a little bit, and maybe that's because it wasn't perfect, but eventually I got it there. But I just wanted to show you these as examples of the copies that I got. This is only some of them. That wasn't all 15. Another huge thing when you're publishing, you need to choose your correct genre. So why is this important? Well, if I'm putting a book out there and I say this is a fantasy novel, okay? And someone reads it expecting to read fantasy, right? And it's actually science fiction. They're not going to have a good experience because they wanted a specific thing that they bought hoping that it was a fantasy fiction, right? But it wasn't. So you might have a great story, a great book, but if you mislabel it and someone gets that could lead to a bad review, and that could also lead to them not having a good experience of your work. So it's really important to understand genres, how they work. Now there are large-scale genres and there are sub-genres, all right? So for me, I did some research in genres because I didn't want to make that mistake, and I wanted to help people find my work who were looking for what I could do. So science fiction was my kind of general, my book could fit in science fiction, but subgenre was end of Earth, which is very positive, end of Earth and mythic fiction. So if someone really wanted to dial in and wonder what my book was about, I made sure that I put all this into my information about the book so people could really find it. So really important, do not pick the wrong genre. You might think that you're writing science fiction, but you might actually be writing something different. So make sure you research that, and some of these sites that tell you about genre and categories will give you examples of other books in that same genre, and if you feel like that there's some similarities there, then you're probably on the right track. Okay, lastly, I'll talk about print on demand, as long as you guys are interested in learning about this. I didn't know that this was really a thing. I thought that I had to design a book, order like a couple hundred copies, and then try to go sell them. But you can do print on demand. And with the companies I worked with was Kindle Direct Publishing, Ingram Spark, Lulu, and Blurb. Now, they all produce a very similar product with slight variations in color, detail, and page quality and all that stuff. But this basically means that I can offer my book, it can be available to audiences, and they print it whenever someone orders it, right? So I don't have to have a huge amount of these books on hand, they just print them right away. So this is a really awesome way for new publisher, new authors, new voices to get out there. That's what I used. So there are some disadvantages. So You don't really control the printing process this way, right? So you can't just go down to the printer and say, I want to see the proofs, I want to see what's going on. You're working with something like Amazon or KDP or Ingram. You can get it designed perfectly, but if they're mass producing it, or if they're producing one-offs here and there, you can't always control the look of those copies. So you might have some manufacturing defects here and there. It can take longer to fulfill orders depending on how backed up they are versus being able to just give somebody a book or sell someone a book personally. You are dependent on them. If something happened to a KDP tomorrow, then I wouldn't have my book anymore, right? So that's something you need to be considered. And then also, you have to usually manage your own ISBNs. Now, an ISBN is like your ID label for your book, and a lot of these companies will offer to include that for you for free. And what that means is if I was to go with an ISBN from KDP or Ingram, then my book would have their imprint on it, so it would look like it came from them. But I decided to buy my own ISBN and put it on my book so that when people scanned it, it had my information. So just, if you're thinking about publishing seriously, get your own ISBN. They do cost money, they're not too expensive, but you can put it on there, and then the book more so belongs to you and goes to you. The advantages, lots of these. I talked about not having to keep an inventory. If you need to make an update to your book, it's as easy as changing the file, uploading it, and saying, this is my new version. And then they'll be printing that version next. So you will have mistakes in your book. It just happens. I read it tons of times. There is still a spelling error here and there. It just happens. With print on demand, you can upload a new file. That's your new file for the book, and that's what people get when they order. So really, really good thing there. If you were to buy a whole huge inventory, you had a mistake, you had the mistake 1,000 times, right? And there it is. They do offer paperback, hardcover, digital variations, so you can translate your book easily from paperback to a digital format to an ebook. They make that pretty straightforward. They already have built-in audience sometimes, and you get your author copies, so that's a huge one. Here's some of my author copies. So once you've published to something like Amazon, you have an opportunity to order author copies. An author copy is basically just your book. It goes to you. You get it at cost. And then you can, do things like this. I have some here. You can go and you can take them to comic book shops. You can take them to bookstores, libraries, however you want. And it's really great. So that's a huge bonus to this. You can still keep your own inventory. It doesn't have to be massive. And it's very affordable to do this as well. So once again, I wanted to talk a little bit about resources. So Blambot, great for learning about comic art. Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud is a wonderful book. Comics and Sequential Art by Will Eisner. Eisner coined sequential art, so he knows something about that. And then also The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell will kind of go in depth into what that hero's journey is and how you can apply that to your own storytelling. Had to add this. There's something, I wanted to stop doing this a lot. This is a lot of work. Hundreds of hours. You're drawing for hours at a time. Sometimes it feels like you can't do it. Sometimes you think that this story is terrible. No one's going to like it. And that might be the case. But I didn't give up on it. I kept pushing. I kept begging people for advice. I kept going out and trying to find out as much as I could about what I was embarking on. I was truthful to myself. I learned about what I felt was important as a writer, and I stuck to that. And I worked through a lot of the challenges. My peer review was really hard. It was brutal. When you have people that you look up to who are like, I don't think this part is that successful. I don't think this is compelling. And these are things that you put 40 hours in just that one little section. It is really hard. So what you just need to remember is that the process is not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. But it is so rewarding to get it out there and to finish it and to share it with people. I've already had so many positive experiences with everybody about this book. It's been huge for me as an artist as well. It's really helped hone my skills. It's one of my most favorite things I've done in my life so far. So there's that. And just don't give up on it. It's easy to do. It takes a long time. It takes professional artists 3 to 5 years to do a graphic novel, okay? And that's like probably working at least, a couple hours a day on this thing. So don't give up. Keep going if you're there making stuff. And yeah, and I'm here to help as well. You can shoot me an email and say, hey, I feel like I need help with yada, yada, yada. I'll be happy to give you some advice, whether it's welcome or not. Thank you very much.